This is the best moments of the Barbecue Central show in 10 minutes or less. Ever wish you could re-listen to your favorite interview or segment? Do you enjoy hearing older shows for the first time in years? Then the best moments of the Barbecue Central show in 10 minutes or less is just what you need. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome, everyone, to the best moments of the Barbecue Central show in 10 minutes or less. Today's best moments comes from September 25th, 2012. Dan Coogle stopped by. Dan is from Pitbulls Up in Smoke Barbecue, talking a little bit about food safety as well as his pork program in general. Second segment today, Chris Lilly, Big Bob Gibson's, talking about the evolution of barbecue as well as pork selection. Show. Great show. Let's get to it. Here we go.
Go ahead and race over to the hotline and grab Pitmaster of Pitbulls Up in Smoke. First time to the show, Danny Coogle joining me. Danny, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing fine, sir.
Thanks for joining me and taking the time tonight, Danny. And I guess before we get into the main portion of the interview, and we're going to be talking a little bit about food safety and cross-contamination, all that stuff, you know, for the folks that maybe aren't as familiar with you, maybe a little bit about yourself, and then, of course, how you got in this whole barbecue mess.
Well, you know, we've got Pitbulls Up in Smoke. We've been competing for, 2.5 years. Came out, strong, and we've been doing well ever since we started.
Danny, what was the impetus to get you into competition? Did you have some friends that did it? Did you see that there was an event around you and you decided to give it a whirl? Or were you in, like, the restaurant business of barbecue and decided to jump in? Where's the spark for you?
Well, Greg, I was actually helping out a couple of buddies, and I never even heard of barbecue competitions and whatnot. And they asked me to come and cook a pork butt because I was a pretty good cook, around the neighborhood. And I said, okay. And we went down there, and I looked around, and they said, these guys do this every weekend. And I was like, really? I mean, I found it hard to believe that actually, these people got together and cooked every weekend like this in competition. So we cooked that night, and it was one of those, nights where we stayed up all night drinking, and I dumped a little bit of this in there, and I put a little bit of that on there, and I put a little bit of this. I could never recreate what I did that night, but at the end of the day, I could barely see the next morning and walk to the stage when my name got called for, I took first place pork butt.
Hook, line, and sinker.
I don't know how I won that, but I pulled it off, and I was like, you know what, that wasn't so hard, so that's where it started.
Danny Coogle joining me here on the show. Danny, the other thing that I'm always endlessly fascinated with is barbecue team names. Where does Pitbulls Up in Smoke come from?
Well, Pitbulls is actually not a pit bull as in a dog, but a bull as in bovine, a bull with horns and whatnot. So it was a Pitbulls, and it was a couple of us guys there, so we were the Pitbulls. And after going through and looking up our name in KCBS, we saw there was another Pitbulls. So I said, well, let's just call it Pitbulls Up in Smoke. And that's how the name stuck.
So you're third in pork right now, as we said, KCBS for that category. It's probably one of the categories that has given a lot of top pitmasters fits this year with inconsistency. Can you attribute your success to one or two things or three things? Can you give us a little insight on why you're being so successful at pork this year?
I was lucky enough to pick up Chris Lilly's cookbook, and I read all about it, the way he cooks his pork, and started looking at his recipes and whatnot. Quite frankly, Chris Lilly's cookbook was the foundation of my success in all my categories. Chris Lilly's cookbook is I think it should be, it's, one of those things that all pitmasters should get and look at and really study. But anyway, I went through that, and then I just started to keep it simple, and spoke to Chris a little bit more in person about the way he cooks his pork. After all, he's 8-time world champion in pork. And so I figured I'd take whatever advice he gave me and combined it. And I'm going to be honest with you, I just keep it very simple. And that's the whole, to me, that's the secret. Just treat it like pork, and it's a delicate meat. And Don't overdo it. Don't over-inject it. Don't over-season it. Don't try to change its flavor by injecting it full of things that shouldn't be in there. Just let it be itself and cook slow and low, and it comes out perfect every time.
Danny Coogle joining me here on the show, pitmaster of Pit Bulls Up in Smoke, currently third in pork right now. Danny, have you started messing around at all, or have you ever experimented with this new age of pork that's starting to get a little bit more run now, the Berkshire or the Heritage style hogs, or you just take whatever's at the big box store?
Well, I've tried all of those, and for me, I found them to be too high of a quality pork for me to have a consistent product every time I cooked. For me, either they fell apart, or if I cooked for them to 185 degrees, they came out 4 different consistencies. None of them came out the same. So I learned right away, for me, that those high dollar porks and those really good cuts of meat, for me, didn't come out consistently every time. When I went 1, 2, 3, and this was my result, that didn't happen. So I just stuck with plain old IBP butts out of Restaurant Depot, and I've had great success with them because they're pretty much consistent every time. The meat, the marbling, and the fat content.
Did you ever take part in a barbecue class or, take under private lessons or anything like that when you were starting to come up to hone the craft at all, or did you not bother with any of that?
Well, I started out cooking by myself, learning things the hard way. I did make a few friends along the way. I was lucky enough to have made a friend in Bubba Lattimore. We went out and cooked together one time. It was an FBA. I didn't learn much. I knew how to cook. My pork and my whatnot, and really the way Bubba does his thing, I tried it and it doesn't really work for me. But what I took away from him was how to compete, how to be organized, how to lay your stuff out, how to be prepared for your next step. When you get done with chicken, have everything laid out ready for your ribs, and then have everything laid out ready for your pork, and how to move smoothly and consistently and be organized. That was something I didn't know how to do, and he's extremely efficient when he competes in the way he does stuff, and I was lucky enough to have learned that from him. And
you were going to be on the Pork Butt Roundtable, the last portion of those competition roundtables I did a couple weeks ago. You came down with some food poisoning instead. What exactly happened to you?
Well, I'll tell you what happens. Everybody knows that meat has to be at a certain temperature. That being said, let's move past that. What happens is this. I've got my sodas and my water and everything in a clean, sterile environment in my cooler. Buddy comes by and says, look, I want to store some stuff in your cooler because I don't have room in mine anymore. I said, no problem. He dumps his stuff in my cooler. I get something to drink out of there. I get sick. I get sick because he had meat, chicken, pork, something in that cooler that his drinks came out of. And that's how you get sick. I've had fellas that came to cook with me, and I wasn't around when they showed up, so they took their beverages and they put them in the guy next door's cooler. And when I showed up, they took the stuff out of their cooler and they put it in my cooler. And that's all it takes. And it's happened to me a few times, and I've gotten pretty strict about what happens. And I've got a refrigerator in my trailer, and I keep all my beverages, my sodas, my water, and whatnot in my refrigerator. And dirty cooler water will get you every time. You come down with salmonella, botulism, E. coli, and they're not fun to get. And I've gotten the shakes. I've come down with the shakes 3 times in the past 2 years, and it's expensive. And you spend a good amount of time on antibiotics because of it.
To put in your request for a future show, please contact Jon Solberg via email at JON@theBBQCentralShow.com.
Chris Lilly, Big Bob Gibson's joining me here on the show. Chris, if I could ask you, and we kind of touched on it a little bit in regards to, the bare bones contest and some of the other events coming up. You've been in this game a long time. You've seen a lot. How many or what are some of the biggest changes that you have seen that, maybe you used to do it when you were out competing, when you first got out there, and now the present day where you're like, man, that's something I would never do now, or that's something that we used to do that we're not going to even bother with because it is going to tank our score? What are some of those biggest evolutions of barbecue that you've seen over the years?
Well, the biggest evolution absolutely has to do with probably pork shoulder. When I first started cooking pork shoulder, it was basically injection, dry rub, put it on the pit, shut it up, forget about it. I would pull it off the bone and I would serve it. KCBS, I did not sauce my pork whatsoever when I started. Memphis and May, I never put an ounce of sauce on my pork through the first 6 World Championships at pork in Memphis and May. I never sauced my pork. Always turned in sauce on the side. But now, Memphis and May contest, I'll without a doubt put a sweet glaze on my pork before it comes off the pit. KCBS, I glaze my pork. It seems everything is moving toward a sweet glaze. I would not call my pork saucy by any means, and I still don't sauce my brisket. But I guess the biggest changes in me is I'm having to adapt and put a lot more sauce on my meat than I used to. Hopefully, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed on this, hopefully one day it will turn back around and start getting away from sauce, because I think we're losing a little bit. Everybody's going to the same sauce, covering up a lot of the flavor of the meat. So maybe one day it'll revert back to how it once was. I hope it.
Chris Lilly joining me here on the show, kind of talking a little bit about the evolution of barbecue. Chris, obviously you're well known for the pork shoulder. The ribs are obviously coming along very nicely as well. When we refer back to the pork shoulder, it seems like, and I'm going to reference brisket here just for the moment, but I'll segue over to pork. When Myron Mixon was on the first season of Pitmasters and started talking about Wagyu beef and Wagyu brisket, and all of a sudden it seemed to really spark quite a small fire within that community, and a lot of people are using it now. All of a sudden, you're starting to hear Caribou pork. You're hearing Berkshire, the Heritage Hog. Is that something that you have messed around with at all in competition, or just in general life, or do you just steer away from that?
For a long time, and actually both competition and in the barbecue restaurant business, especially in small town, South, you really cannot bring in the the heritage breed porks or the specialty porks. You basically got the commodity pork to stay at price point. But I've been actually testing, heritage breed pork and all kind of pork that are raised different ways. I do a lot of work for the National Pork Board and a lot of things with them. So I have a lot of access to pork that I would normally have. And I love it. Anytime you give me more choices, I'm going to be able to put a better product at my family's table and also the judges' table. And without a doubt, I've been experimenting with heritage breed porks for a while. I mean, when I start talking about the perfect pig, for me, it's probably I'm a big fan of Duroc front shoulder, Mangalisa ham. I like the belly meat from Berkshire. It's a lot of choices out there, and you better believe it makes a difference. But when it comes to pork, I guess the two major factors are color and marbling. What color is the pork? Is it a pale pink? Is it a reddish pink? Which reddish pink, in my opinion, is better. It actually has a lot more moisture retention than a pale pink. And also marbling within the meat, which is also another important factor.
Chris Lilly joining me here on the show.
And there you have it. From September 25th, 2012, Dan Coogle, Chris Lilly. Hey, head on over to the Barbecue Central Show homepage at thebbqcentralshow.com. Do me a favor, subscribe to the Barbecue Central Show via podcast. Never miss an episode of that show or this show again. While you're there, you can search the archives. If you got an idea for a show, get a hold of me at Jon, Jon, at thebbqcentralshow.com. Happy to put it together for you. Might even know it's in the can. Thanks for checking out the best moments of the Barbecue Central show in 10 minutes or less. I am your host, Jon Solberg, and I will talk to you soon.